hot wind swept across the island of Sumbawa in the early hours of April 1815. It carried with it the scent of salt from the nearby ocean and something else. Something faintly sulphurous that spoke of the earth's dark heart. Old man Engabe felt the wind ruffle his sparse white hair as he gazed out to sea. On this tiny speck of land at the edge of the known world, life had always been hard, but at least there was beauty. His gaze lingered on the handsome young Dutch colonial officer who stood beside him, a man who had become a regular visitor over the past year. Ever since he first arrived as an ensign aboard one of the ships in the spice trade. The officer, Jan Colin van der Brug, watched the waves crest and fall with an air of detachment. He, too, sensed a disturbance in the air, a subtle shift like before a storm. Yet, when he turned to Engabe, he saw only tranquil smiles on the old man's face. Indeed, these people seemed blessed with an almost childlike innocence, oblivious to the horrors that were about to befall them, and, in fact, the entire planet. Mount Tambora loomed in the distance, its peak shrouded in mist. For weeks, the mountain had been rumbling, spewing thick plumes of smoke into the sky. But such displays were commonplace. Tambora was a volcano, after all, and the locals were accustomed to its fiery breath. When it roared, they sheltered in their villages, and when it fell silent, they returned to their farms. This time, however, something was different. The ground trembled with a violence that shook even the sturdiest of homes. And when they ventured out to inspect the damage, they found the mountain was wreathed in a strange black cloud, unlike any they had seen before. For days, the villagers went about their business as usual, although a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. Then the rain came. It poured down in torrents, mixing with fine black ash that fell from the sky in suffocating clouds. The air grew thick and acrid, making each breath a painful ordeal. Every so often, a bolt of lightning would split the sky, momentarily illuminating the swirling ash cloud that now permanently shrouded the mountain. On April, van der Brug stood on the veranda of the small fort, watching the relentless deluge. He too had felt the earthquakes that had shaken the island in the preceding days. To his untrained eye, the mountain wore an aspect of menacing calm, yet he could not help but be struck by the unnatural stillness of the elements. Even the ubiquitous rain had ceased its drumming on the tin roof. All around him, an oppressive quiet had fallen, broken only by the distant roar of the surf. Then, as quickly as it began, the rain stopped. The clouds parted briefly, revealing the sullen grey sky above. But what truly stole the breath away was the sight of Mount Tambora. The summit, usually wreathed in mist, was now clearly visible. In the brief span of a few hours, it appeared to have grown, its peak scraping against the clouds like the prow of some colossal ship. What had once been a distant landmark was now uncomfortably close. Van der Brug realized with a jolt that the mountain was considerably taller than when he had first set eyes on it. But, if that was the case, where did the extra rock go? The answer came in the form of a deafening roar that split the air. From the top of the mountain, avalanches of rock and earth cascaded down its sides, cascading into the sea in giant undersea landslides. Water spouted high into the air, and then the wave hit the shore. People ran screaming for the hills as wall of water surged forward, sweeping everything in its path out to sea. Some were caught up in the wave and vanished beneath its churning depths. Others clung desperately to rocks and trees, their bodies battered by the relentless pounding of the waves, until finally the water receded, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. In the aftermath, a thick blanket of ash covered the land. Homes were obliterated, corpses strewn across the ground, and the sea was littered with debris. It was a scene straight from hell. Now, however, the full force of the cataclysm had yet to be unleashed. Tambora belched forth a monstrous plume of ash and gas that blotted out the sun and plunged the island into darkness. It was as though night had fallen in the middle of the day. A hush fell over the survivors. They stared in terrified fascination at the towering ash cloud that had transformed the landscape in the space of a few hours. As if awakening from a dream, they began to flee. The strongest and youngest raced towards higher ground, while the old and weak stumbled along, their faces creased with terror. Some made it to the shelter of the hills, but many did not. Ash rained down on them, searing their flesh and burning their eyes until they collapsed, never to stir again. Vanderbrug stood mesmerized as he watched the events unfold. He had seen great storms in his day, but nothing like this. The energy released in the eruption was staggering, a stark reminder of the awesome power of nature that dwarfed humanity's own puny conflicts. The explosion was so violent that it produced a shockwave that raced across the ocean at 600 miles per hour. It circled the globe 3 times, changing atmospheric pressure so drastically that compasses spun wildly off course. Yet, even as he marveled at the sheer force of the eruption, a cold dread seeped into his bones. There would be more earthquakes, he knew, and more tsunamis. But those who survived would be lucky to escape the choking ash that now filled the air. Every so often, the wind shifted, bringing with it the stench of death and decay. Bodies lay buried beneath the ash, bloated and fly-blown. With each passing day, the number of survivors dwindled, succumbing to the harsh conditions or the lingering effects of the tsunamis. Those who remained alive now faced a desperate struggle to stay that way. But hope flickered on the horizon. On April, the skies cleared and the ash cloud atop Tambora diminished slightly. A single ray of sunlight broke through the gloom, painting a thin line of gold across the devastated landscape. The survivors stirred. Stirring from their stupor, they looked up at the sky as if to a deity and whispered prayers of gratitude. At last, the nightmare was ending. Relief had arrived, but they were wrong. Tambora had merely paused for breath. What happened next was far worse than anything they could have imagined. On April, Mount Tambora erupted again. It was as if the mountain had deliberately waited until the survivors had regained their strength before delivering a final, fatal blow. This time, the blast was even more violent than the last, unleashing an explosive force equivalent to 600 of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima. When the dust eventually settled, Mount Tambora was the tallest mountain on Earth, its peak piercing the clouds. But the eruption had global consequences, triggering massive climatic shifts that led to widespread crop failure, famine, and war. Europe sweltered through a summer of unprecedented heat in 1816, while blizzards and frost swept across the United States and Canada, killing thousands of cattle. By the end of the year, reports of food shortages were coming in from every corner of the globe. Even here on Sumbawa, where the soil was rich and the climate balmy, the after-effects of the eruption were keenly felt. Crops withered and died, forcing the starving villagers to abandon their homes and flee to higher ground. It was as though the mountain was deliberately punishing those who had survived the initial blast. Yet somehow life still flickered on. In the midst of this devastation, amid the grinding poverty and soul-destroying toil, a single act of kindness blossomed. An elderly couple, Wyon and Nyoman, took in an abandoned baby they found floating in an ash-filled stream. Despite their own desperate circumstances, they shared their meager rations with the child and prayed that somehow he would survive. They named him Raiden, which meant hope. Little did they know that Raiden would indeed become a symbol of hope for the entire world. For, as the years passed, and the memory of Tambora's wrath faded, the story of the selfless couple who adopted an abandoned child became a beacon of light in the darkness. It served as a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the human spirit could endure. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Chapter 2. Ash on the Wind. The year is 1815, and Earth has just experienced the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. A tremendous explosion, which took place 3 months ago on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa, spewed forth so much ash and gas that it is beginning to spread across the globe. Although thousands perished in the initial blast, most of the survivors on the island are starting to pick up the pieces and rebuild their lives. But across the oceans, things are about to get very strange. Sailors in the Atlantic report unseasonable fog and strange sunsets to their fellow seafarers. Meanwhile, scientists on land are noticing an inexplicable drop in temperature. They have no idea that a colossal ash cloud is drifting steadily toward Europe, and this cloud will bring with it an atmospheric catastrophe, unlike anything humanity has ever seen. As the world stands on the brink of the biggest climate disaster in human history, we meet our fictional meteorologist, the Chevalier Etienne de Montgolfier. After a long and illustrious career mapping the winds and weather patterns of France, the Chevalier has retired to his estate in the French countryside. He spends his days writing and tending to his garden, but he hasn't given up on his first love, meteorology, and today, like every day, he's made some observations. While walking through his property, Etienne has noticed something odd about the sky. It's not quite blue anymore. It looks kind of grey. When he gazes into the heavens, he can see something else disturbing. There are no birds. It's not migration season. Why have all the birds suddenly abandoned the skies? His wife enters the room and asks what's troubling him. She knows her husband's mind is always in the clouds, but this is the first time she's seen him so upset. As she listens to his concerns, she tries to soothe away his worries, but she's worried about him. Has his mind finally snapped from too many years of studying the sky? But then his gaze turns hard and determined. Whatever it is, he says he'll find out what's happening. And for the sake of everyone on Earth, he better do it quickly, because there's a big storm coming. In the mid-19th century, the way people understood the weather was extremely limited. The main instrument used to measure atmospheric conditions was the mercury barometer. This instrument would rise when the air pressure increased, fall when the air pressure decreased. Basically, it could tell you if it was going to rain or not. Aside from that, there were simple tools like thermometers, windsocks, and rain gauges. That was it. If they knew what was coming, scientists at the time wouldn't be so baffled. But unfortunately, the technology simply did not exist. And they had no idea that massive amounts of volcanic ash were about to block out the sun. Today, we have supercomputers to model and predict weather patterns around the world. We also have satellites, weather balloons, and all kinds of fancy equipment to measure different atmospheric conditions. But back then, the only way to really collect data was to send out ships and weather balloons. Ships equipped with barometers and telescopes would sail around the world to map the weather. But it would take them months to make a full circuit, so any changes in the atmosphere would go unknown for a long time. Plus, it was difficult to know whether the weather phenomenon being observed was a local one or part of a global trend. Etienne is working with the tools available to him though, and he soon makes another important observation. Every morning he wakes up before sunrise and checks the temperature outside. Today, the temperature is 2 degrees lower than it should be for this time of year. Of course, he doesn't know that Mount Tambora erupted 3 months ago in Indonesia. He only knows that the temperature is dropping and the skies are hazy. The Chevalier remembers an incident from 36 years earlier when a smaller volcano erupted in France. He was just a child at the time, but his father, a well-known scientist, told him all about it. That time, the ash cloud only covered a small area of the country, but it caused major problems. Farmers lost crops due to lack of sunlight. The roads were slippery from ash on the ground. The smell permeated everything. And worst of all, there was no rain for an entire year after the ash cloud rolled in. This is different though. Something about this ash cloud feels off. Not only is it covering the entire country, it's getting darker every day. Etienne decides to travel to Paris to consult with some friends in the scientific community. Maybe they've noticed these changes, too. Perhaps there's already a theory to explain it. Or maybe they'll be able to come up with a solution to fix it. When he arrives, he finds that his friends are just as baffled as he is. One suggests it might be the result of an unknown chemical reaction in the atmosphere. Another believes it's some kind of disease afflicting the birds and turning the sky grey. None of the theories make sense. What they do know is that something is seriously wrong. The Chevalier realizes that if this continues, there won't just be crop failures and slippery roads. People will die from exposure or starvation. The group decides the best course of action is to write a letter to Napoleon, who's currently waging war in Russia. They explain the situation and ask for volunteers to fund a research expedition. Perhaps, if someone travels up in a balloon and takes samples from the cloud, they'll be able to figure out what's happening. Once they have a diagnosis, they can treat the symptoms and save the day. But this isn't the first time Napoleon has been asked for funding. And while he loves science, he's got bigger fish to fry. He tells the group to try and solve the problem themselves and offers up one of his telescopes in case they need it. Meanwhile, the Chevalier and his team head out to a field where they plan to launch their first balloon. Soon enough, they're standing in front of the massive orb, ready to send up a hot air balloon and enter the ash cloud. The Chevalier takes a deep breath, then climbs into the basket. His team releases the anchor and the balloon floats away into the sky. At first, it's fun. The Chevalier waves to the crowd below. But then he starts to get scared. What if he gets trapped in the cloud forever? What if he never comes back down? What if the world ends and he's the last man on Earth? But then something even more terrifying happens. The ash cloud starts to rain down on him. Big raindrops fall from the sky and quickly cover the balloon in a layer of ash. It seems like he's actually touching the cloud. Can he get any higher? Then the wind picks up. The Chevalier grabs onto the basket for dear life as the balloon floats up into the ash cloud. He's now completely surrounded by grey skies. All he can see are the dark edges of the balloon. What if it pops? What if he falls to his death? Then he sees something amazing. Despite being completely covered in ash, the sun shines brightly above the cloud. Through the telescope, the Chevalier can see the darkness surrounding the sun like a halo. Is this the source of the cold? Could the world really be ending? With his instruments broken by the ash, the Chevalier has no way of knowing how high he's floated. But eventually, the wind changes direction and the balloon starts to float back down to Earth. The Chevalier is relieved to say the least, but when he emerges from the basket, he's greeted by a crowd of angry townspeople. They re-upset because the ash from the cloud has destroyed their crops, and they blame the Chevalier for bringing it. How can he explain that it wasn't his fault? That there's something even bigger at play here? Something about this story feels familiar, doesn't it? That's because it's based on the real events that unfolded after the eruption of Mount Tambora. Mount Tambora is a supervolcano located on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa. Its eruption in 1815 was the largest in recorded history, unleashing 40 cubic kilometers of ash and pumice and causing massive devastation in the region. But its impact didn't stop there. Because of the sheer amount of ash released, scientists believe that the eruption caused the coldest year on record in 1816. Nicknamed the year without a summer, 1816 brought record snowfalls to Europe and North America and killed hundreds of thousands of people from starvation and disease. Now, you probably know the rest of the story. The devastation of 1816 inspired Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein. But aside from its impact on literature, how else did this event affect the world? Well, the cool temperatures led to widespread crop failure, which led to food shortages and riots. The price of bread, flour, and meat spiked, leading to widespread hunger. The situation was especially bad in southern and eastern Europe, as well as parts of Russia and China. In Switzerland, the summer of 1816 brought torrential rains and flooding, ruining what little harvest the country had left. As a result, people fled their homes and took shelter in caves or abandoned buildings. It was such a brutal summer that Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Mary Shelley decided to stay indoors and entertain themselves by reading ghost stories. You can probably guess what happened next. And although the scientific community was baffled at the time, today we understand exactly what happened here. Large amounts of sulfate aerosols were released into the stratosphere, forming a thick cloud that reflected sunlight back into space. This cooled the surface of the Earth for several years. Now we can track volcanic eruptions and predict how they might affect the climate. But back in 1816, people really thought the world was ending. You wake up hungry, but not from hunger. You're well fed, or at least you think you are. You're just hungry because that's what people do. But there's no joy in it, none of the satisfaction you remember from past meals. And then you look out the window and understand why. It's snowing. Not that kind of snow, though. This is dry, powdery stuff. The kind that collects on the trees and rooftops, but melts quickly when you touch it. You watch as your breath plucks the last of the snowflakes from the air. Then you go back to bed, pulling the blanket over your head because even though you're bundled tight beneath quilts and wool, you can feel the cold seeping into your bones. You wake up again before dawn and wonder how many sleeps until spring. The snow is gone. You step outside, squinting against the chill wind. The trees bear the fresh scars of winter, etched white against dark bark. It's beautiful, but you know this beauty won't bring forth fruit or grain. A crow lands on the fence post and cries. The sound echoes across the fields and seems to mock you. You walk out into the field and push aside the dead stalks of corn, broken by the weight of an early frost. You kick at a clod of dirt and bury the seed you've been saving for next year's planting. Your father calls from the porch. He doesn't need to say anything. You know he wants to know if the seed is planted. You shake your head and he nods his understanding. Back inside, the only sound is the crackling of the hearth. Your mother hums as she sorts through their meager stores, then gives you a small loaf of bread and a cup of weak tea. Days turn into weeks. The sun climbs higher each day, but the cold persists. Flowers bloom, but the leaves stay tucked tight on the branches. You wear your warmest coat and help your father weed the garden. Even the weeds seem reluctant to grow. One evening, a neighbor stumbles onto your porch, his face drawn and haggard. He tells you they found a dead deer in the woods with its belly distended, bloated and filled with grubs. The first sign that something is wrong with the land. A week later, the other neighbors come to your house and stand on your porch, while your father speaks to them. Their faces are grim, and when they leave, you notice that they move in agitated clumps, like birds startled from their roost. That night, you wake to the sound of your parents arguing. You pretend to be asleep when they come into your room, but you hear every word. They speak in hushed tones, but you can hear the desperation in their voices. "I can't bear to see them like this," your mother says. "We have to tell them." "And what good will that do?" your father says. "What good has the truth ever done?" Your mother bursts into tears. "They'll find a way," she whispers. The next morning, the neighbors gather again, and this time you join them. You don't speak much. You don't know what to say. After all, you're just the farmer's daughter. But you nod when others suggest that they should go west, where the land is rich and the winters are kind. Maybe there they can start again. Then your brother returns from hoeing the fields. Like you, he doesn't speak much. But after the others have left, he asks, "Are we going to?" "I don't know, son," your father says, running a hand through his thin hair. "I don't know." At dusk, when your father is mending a fishing net, you sit beside him and ask what's happening to the land. "It's tired," he says quietly. "The soil is poor and the water is cold. The plants die and the animals die. Everything dies." He looks at you, his eyes old and sad. "I saw the same thing happen in Michigan," he says, "so I came here to build a new life. But this land, it's tired too." You spend the night listening to the frogs croaking in the marsh, which used to be full of bullfrogs, plump and juicy, easy to catch. Now there are just frogs. You wake to the insistent chirping of crickets and the distant hammering of a woodpecker. The sun is warm, but the wind is cold. Later that day, you stand at the edge of the forest watching your brother go in. He's joining the others who've gone west. You want to go with him, but you know you can't. You have to stay and take care of your parents. As the days lengthen, the heat grows heavy and sticky. One afternoon, while you're churning butter, your mother comes into the kitchen. She smells strongly of lilacs and sage. "I spoke to Martha," she says. "She's going to stay with us." "For how long?" you ask. "As long as she can," your mother says, her voice cracking. "And when she can't anymore, I will go with her." Your father comes in and puts a hand on your mother's shoulder. "It's getting late," he says. "Let's have dinner." You eat in silence, and after you finish, you clear the table and go to the porch. You're scrubbing a plate when your brother comes back from the west. He looks thinner somehow, and his clothes are dirty and torn. "Why did you come back?" you ask. He shrugs. "There's nothing for me out there," he says. "Nothing but dust and rocks." He runs a hand through his hair, then looks down at his feet. "I thought maybe there was something here," he says. You spend the night in the house, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. In the morning, you go to the barn and find your horse dead, collapsed in the aisle. His eyes are wide open and staring. There's a wild look on his face. That day, a traveling preacher comes to town. People come from miles around to hear him speak. He talks about how the devil is loose in the world and how everyone should repent and turn to God before it is too late. While he's speaking, you look out at the crowd, at their sullen faces and their desperate eyes, and you realize that he's right. It is too late. You spend the summer helping your mother care for Martha. You pick berries and weed the garden, but nothing tastes good. Nothing makes you feel strong enough to keep going. At night, you listen to the crickets and the frogs, and sometimes you hear the distant howl of wolves, and you think, let the wolves come. Let them take me. One evening, you hear the tramp of boots on the porch. Then your father comes in, his face ashen. "Eliza," he says, his voice hoarse. "Eliza, we have to get out of here. Where are we going?" you ask. He shakes his head. "I don't know. Anywhere away from here." You watch from the porch as the townspeople trudge along the road leading out of town. Some are walking, others are running. All of them are looking over their shoulders at the town, at the dead fields and the dying crops and the empty sky. That night you sleep under the stars. In the morning you wake to find your parents gone. You follow the road to the west and find them standing with the others, waiting for the sun to rise. As the first light touches the horizon, you run to them and throw your arms around their necks. "Don't leave me," you whisper. "Don't leave me." But they have to go. You watch them disappear over the hill, and you left alone with the dying embers of the fire and the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. You think maybe it's a good thing that they've gone. Maybe they'll find a place where the land is rich and the winters are kind. Maybe they can start again. But then you look down at the dead branches at your feet, and you know that wherever they go, they'll take the winter with them. And so you wander off, too, following the road to the west, deeper into the heart of the dying land. A shadow fell upon Europe in the year 1816. It was not an eclipse or a passing cloud, but something far stranger and more terrible, a year without a summer. Hi, everyone. Hi there. Welcome to episode 4 of our ongoing Mary Shelley series exploring the life, loves, and literary legacy of the author of Frankenstein. This is the story of how she changed the world. One dark, stormy night in Switzerland, Mary Shelley, her new husband, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, the dashing English nobleman Lord Byron, and his personal physician, the enigmatic Dr. John Polidori, found themselves trapped inside a lakeside villa with only a handful of candles, a bottle of wine, and a pile of ghost stories for company. In this strange and unsettling atmosphere, they began trading tales of terror, each trying to outdo the last, until finally Mary had a vision of a creature so disturbing that it would haunt her waking thoughts and inspire one of the most terrifying novels ever written. Before we begin, a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you enjoy these videos. You can also check out my other videos, where I explore the hidden histories of iconic places. Our story begins a few weeks earlier when Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, left London for Switzerland, the legendary home of romance and adventure. Percy was already well known in literary circles for his radical romantic poetry, while Mary had yet to publish anything under her own name. She was also pregnant, a fact that caused some degree of scandal, since the couple had eloped less than a year before and were still considered rather unwed. Upon arriving in Switzerland, they rented a cottage near Lake Geneva and invited Lord Byron to stay with them. Byron was an old friend of Percy's and one of the most famous men of the age. Celebrated for his rakish good looks, his scandalous affairs, and his equally scandalous poetry. A man of powerful presence, he nevertheless suffered from ill health and was easily bored. While staying with the Shelleys, Byron met the young Dr. John Polidori, who was serving as his personal physician. Polidori was a charming and intellectual man, though not nearly as well known as his famous patient. He had recently published a collection of poetry that received favorable reviews. But in truth, Polidori desperately craved more recognition and saw an opportunity to make a name for himself by ingratiating himself with the famous Lord Byron. Thus, it was perhaps not surprising that when Byron, restless and in need of stimulation, suggested that the four of them should move to the nearby Villa Diodati, the doctor readily agreed. This grand lakeside estate belonged to the wealthy and eccentric Swiss banker Jacques Necker, who was currently abroad. Byron had been staying at Villa Diodati for several weeks already and had grown rather fond of it. It was a rambling structure filled with art and antiques, and had a certain air of faded grandeur about it. Nevertheless, it was decidedly chilly, and the steady rain outside made it clear that summer was not on its way. Soon, the four friends found themselves snowed in with nothing to do. After several days, they began to grow rather bored. Then, on an afternoon when the rain fell especially heavily, Lord Byron decided that it was time to entertain his companions. Returning from a trip into town, he announced that he had just bought a collection of ghost stories. "Now," said Byron, with a wicked glint in his eye, "let us see who among us can write the best." And so, as darkness fell and the storm outside reached a fever pitch, they gathered together in the drawing room. There was a single window, but even its curtains could not keep out the eerie daylight that filtered through the clouds. On the table between them sat the ghost stories and a bottle of wine. Each person took a story and read it aloud. Some were silly and some were sad, but all were meant to terrify. As the night wore on, however, their imaginations began to race. Why should they merely read ghost stories, they asked, when they could make up their own? With another bottle of wine, they began trading ideas, tossing out characters and scenarios, letting their words mingle and merge until eventually they had composed a tale unlike any other. It was dark, darker than any night, for within the shadows lurked a monster. Something evil had been brought into existence, something unnatural. A creature without a face that moved through the world, leaving death and destruction in its wake. Then the night was broken. Someone stirred in their chair and the creature disappeared. In the morning light, it seemed impossible that such a terrible thing could have been conjured. Yet, as the hours passed, the spectre returned. That creature, nameless, shapeless, inescapable, haunted Mary Shelley's waking thoughts. Day after day, the rain fell, keeping her indoors and turning her dreams into nightmares. Finally, she could bear it no longer and called for her husband, Percy. Pouring out her visions, she told him of a creature born of unnatural science, an experiment gone wrong. From a benevolent but misguided scientist, it had come alive and escaped, only to be hunted down and destroyed. Percy listened patiently, and when Mary finished, smiled and said, "You must write it down." Mary looked back at him, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't," she whispered. "It's too horrible." But Percy insisted, and soon she began to put her dark visions onto paper. As she wrote, the creature became more real, taking shape and form. Its appearance changed, its motives shifted. At first, it had been nothing more than a corpse, animated by dark forces. Now it was something different, something more human. Yet, despite her progress, Mary still hesitated. Writing about such a terrible thing was frightening, but she felt compelled to finish it. So she worked steadily, aided by Percy's constant encouragement, until finally, one afternoon, it was done. She had created a monster, and the world would never be the same. The setting of Frankenstein is firmly rooted in history, but what about its characters? Are they all based on real people? How much of Victor Frankenstein's story mirrors that of his creator? Find out next time when we continue the story of how Mary Shelley changed the world. Though she had completed her masterpiece, Mary Shelley still hesitated to publish it. She feared ridicule and knew that the novel's themes of scientific hubris and social injustice might cause offense. Nevertheless, Percy encouraged her to send it to a publisher, and in 1818, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, was published anonymously in London. To Mary's surprise, it was a critical success. Readers were captivated by the story of Victor Frankenstein and his monstrous creation, and critics praised Mary Shelley's vivid prose and powerful themes. Over the years, Frankenstein has become one of the most important works of Gothic literature ever written. But it was not without controversy. Some readers found the novel's themes of scientific hubris and social injustice to be too controversial and have tried to suppress it. Nevertheless, Frankenstein remains an essential part of our cultural heritage and continues to be read and adapted for new audiences around the world. Next time, on the story of how she changed the world, Mary Shelley confronts censorship and learns the true meaning of family. Meanwhile, in 1826, the year following the publication of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley gave birth to a baby girl whom she named Mary Jane or Claire after the character in Frankenstein. Sadly, the child died shortly after birth. Mary was devastated by the loss and turned to writing to help her cope. She wrote a short story about a creature who creates a companion for himself out of love, which she hoped would serve as a warning against the dangers of isolation and loneliness. This story was published posthumously as The Last Man and is considered to be one of her finest works. And now you know why. What are your favorite stories from the world of Mary Shelley? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe to join us next time, when we continue the story of how she changed the world forever. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, it's me. Today we're going to continue on with The Year Without a Summer. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out the first 4 chapters of this story. You can find them all linked in the description box down below. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's chapter. Chapter 5, The Hunger Season. Our story takes place in County Mayo in the year 1816. In the small village of Tormakidi, nestled between rolling green hills and the sparkling Atlantic Ocean, there lived a family named Walsh. Theirs was a simple life, much like those around them, sustained by the bounty of the land and the rhythm of the seasons. But this year, 1816, had dealt them a cruel hand. Spring had been late to arrive, but when it did, all seemed well. Buds burst forth on the trees, lambs frolicked in the fields, and the river swelled with the promise of life. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a sinister shift had occurred. The skies, usually so generous with rain, were now parched and unforgiving. The days grew longer and hotter, and a deep, unsettling quiet had fallen over the countryside. The birds, once jubilant, had fallen silent. The bees, normally so industrious, no longer hummed around the flowers. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, creating an oppressive stillness that pressed heavily on the people's hearts. Word spread through the county like wildfire. The crops were failing, the potatoes were rotting, and hunger was gnawing at the bellies of families from one end of Ireland to the other. The price of bread had risen beyond the reach of many, forcing them to make an agonizing choice between eating and meeting their other daily needs. For the Welshes, this meant sacrificing their children's education. Little Liam and Fiona could no longer afford the few shillings needed to attend Mrs. O'Leary's schoolhouse. It wasn't a decision they took lightly. Education was held in high regard in their family, but the stark reality of their situation left them no other choice. As the weeks dragged on, the sky continued its merciless glare, turning the land into a cracked and thirsty expanse. The river, once brimming with life, dwindled, its water turning stagnant and foul. Patches of bog, usually hidden from view, emerged from the ground like skeletal fingers clawing at the cloudless sky. The lush green of the Irish countryside was fading, being replaced by the sickly hues of despair. The villagers, once proud and strong, were now gaunt and hollow-eyed, their bodies bearing the silent testament of hunger. Their skin, once alive with color, was now drawn and pale, resembling the full moon that hung ominously in the night sky. Then came the blight, a sinister visitor that arrived on the wings of the relentless summer wind. It descended upon the potato fields, turning the nights into suffocating blankets of darkness and causing the days to feel endless and empty. Each morning the Welshes awoke to the same heart-wrenching sight. Their precious crop, the lifeline that had sustained them for generations, was wilting and rotting before their very eyes. One by one, the healthy green leaves turned into blackened, withered husks, collapsing onto the ground like mourners at a graveside. The vibrant tubers beneath the soil, once firm and promising, now yielded to the touch, oozing a black, fetid liquid. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, mingling with the cries of starving children and the despair of their parents. The lifeblood of their existence was being drained away, leaving behind only a chilling promise of starvation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, a terrible calm fell over the village. The air, thick with the stench of death and despair, carried the faint sound of laments, each sob echoing the emptiness in their stomachs and the hopelessness in their hearts. The once vibrant community was now shrouded in a pall of gloom, united in their suffering and the grim fate that awaited them. Inside their cottage, the Welshes huddled together, seeking solace in their shared misery. Outside, the wind whispered tales of woe through the skeletal branches of trees, while inside, the silence screamed louder than any storm. The fire had died down to embers, reflecting the fading hope in their eyes. Their meager supper, a few boiled potatoes, lay untouched on the table, a sad reminder of better times. The faces around the table were etched with sorrow, their features gaunt, their eyes hollow, mirroring the desolate landscape outside. They were trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no awakening. Amidst this despair, a young girl named Effa stirred. Unlike her family members, she didn't succumb to the suffocating despair. Her spirit, though battered, refused to be broken. Picking up a quill pen, she began to write. Writing had always been her solace, her escape from the harsh realities of their world. And now, more than ever, it was her lifeline. On a piece of scavenged paper, she poured out her heart. She wrote of the haunting silence of the countryside, the vacant stare of the people, and the menacing presence of the blight. Her words flowed onto the page, each stroke a testament to her indomitable spirit, refusing to be cowed by the encroaching darkness. Her brother Liam, noticing her activity, looked up from his hands, his eyes filled with a mixture of envy and admiration. He, too, had once found solace in books, in stories that transported him to worlds far removed from their own. But with each passing day, the gnawing hunger had chipped away at his resolve, stealing his appetite for anything but food. Seeing Afia's spirit unbroken, a flicker of his old self reignited within him. He watched as she wrote, her brow furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as if reciting a poem only she could hear. For a moment, he forgot about the emptiness in his stomach, the hollowness in his heart. Instead, he was drawn to his sister's quiet strength, her ability to find refuge in the written word when all around them had given into despair. As days bled into weeks, the horror of the blight became undeniable. Families who had once been pillars of the community started to break apart. Some, driven to the edge, sold their possessions, their tears mixing with the dust on their hands. Others, their resolve shattered by the unrelenting grip of hunger, prepared to leave their homes, their footsteps echoing the lament of their ancestors, who had fled Ireland during the Great Famine. Among them were the Welshes. With heavy hearts and even heavier steps, they left behind the only home they had ever known. The ache of their departure was a wound that tore at their souls, a pain that transcended the physical toll of hunger. And so the family set off into the unknown, guided by nothing but the faint hope of a better life somewhere, someplace beyond the horizon. They joined the long line of refugees, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes reflecting the bleak landscape of their present and the uncertain terrain of their future. The sun beat down on their backs, a relentless reminder of the summer that had turned their lives into a torment. With each step, they carried the weight of their past and the burden of their dreams for a future that seemed increasingly out of reach. And that is where we will end today's chapter. Please go ahead and leave your thoughts and comments down below. I'm really excited to see what you guys have to say about today's story. Before you go, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new short stories every single day, so there's always fresh content for you guys to enjoy. Take care and happy reading. June 1795. A thick fog has covered Paris for the past 3 days. It's so dense that people can barely see the ground beneath their feet. On the horizon, the sky meets the earth in a wall of white. But, though there is no wind, the air grows colder by the hour. And when the sun finally breaks through the clouds, the Parisians gasp in surprise at the ghastly green tinge it casts across the city. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Florence, Italy, an old gardener named Giovanni Battista Grassi is staring up at the sky in wonder. He had never seen anything like it before. There was no rain, yet the snow on the nearby hills had turned a deep crimson color, and today, as he pulls a handful of the strange red snow towards him, it mixes with water running from his hose and creates a blood-colored stream. In the colony of Virginia, colonists are standing knee-deep in icy water, pulling dead fish from a frozen lake. In the fields around them, crops have wilted and died, unable to grow in the unseasonable cold. And over 7,000 miles away in China, farmers are staring at withered rice paddies, wondering if they will ever eat again. They have not seen such widespread crop failure in generations. These stories, each stranger than the last, were recorded in newspapers around the world and then forgotten. But one man is determined to make sure that doesn't happen. His name is Jean-Étienne Montgolfier, and thanks to his collection of weather balloons, he may be the only person on Earth who can connect the dots between an Italian volcano, a mysterious fog bank in China, a volcano in the Caribbean, and a lost city in the Amazon. Etienne had been obsessed with the atmosphere since he first learned that the air we breathe is invisible. To him, the sky was more than just a backdrop for life on Earth. It was a living, breathing entity that could be studied, understood, even influenced. So, with the help of his brother Joseph, a paper manufacturer, he began making large balloons out of silk that could float all the way from Paris to the heavens themselves. With these devices, he collected samples of the sky, bits of fog and clouds that he could hold in his hand. Once they were dried and weighed, he carefully documented their properties, recording details about their size, shape, and density. Then he would release them back into the sky with a small payload of instruments that would record data about their altitude and speed. When the balloon eventually landed, he would retrieve it and begin the process all over again. But recently, his balloons had been returning from their journeys with strange, almost unbelievable tales. One brought back a report that the temperature had reached 42 degrees Celsius at an altitude of 11,000 meters. Another indicated that an area of fog had covered the ground below at an altitude of just 30 meters. But the most alarming reports came from his balloons that reached the South Pole, where instead of finding frigid temperatures, they registered a balmy 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Etienne had already started to suspect something was wrong. But when he read an account of red snow falling in Italy, he knew he had to do something. Even though Etienne had never been outside of Europe, he felt a responsibility to share what he had seen with the rest of the world. So he sat down at his desk and dipped his quill into ink. He wrote to the Royal Society, an organization dedicated to the advancement of science founded by King Charles. II of England in 1660. Its members included some of the brightest scientific minds in the country, men who had helped unravel the mysteries of the universe. And Etienne believed they could help him too. He described how his unmanned balloons had encountered unprecedented atmospheric conditions, including areas of fog so thick they had halted their ascent, and patches of sky so hot they had caused their gas canisters to expand. He mentioned the conflicting reports from his balloons, some detailing extreme cold and others reporting unheard of heat. He wrote about the red snow in Italy and the frozen fish in Virginia, connecting them all together as pieces of a much larger puzzle. As he wrote, he realized that he had stumbled upon something truly remarkable. The whole world was experiencing strange weather patterns at the same time, as if some cosmic switch had been flipped overnight. And he suspected that these events were connected, all part of a single cataclysmic event. Etienne sent off his letter and waited, but the Royal Society didn't reply. And so he did something he had never done before. He decided to go public. Etienne began publishing his findings in a French scientific journal. But soon after, he took things a step further and wrote to every major scientific society in Europe, urging them to pay attention to the global anomaly. Finally, someone listened. A professor at the University of Göttingen, a small town in Germany, read Etienne's writings and saw an opportunity to make a name for himself. He wrote back to Etienne, eager to get to the bottom of this mystery once and for all. Together, the two men would set out to solve one of the greatest puzzles in history. Etienne traveled to Göttingen to meet with his new friend, but it was clear that they had very different ideas about how to proceed. The German professor wanted to repeat Etienne's experiments with his own balloons, but with one key difference. He planned to include a human observer, someone who could record data while floating above the clouds. But even as they argued about the best way forward, both men knew that something extraordinary was happening up in the sky. It wasn't just balloons or scientific instruments that were being affected. People all over the world were experiencing strange weather events that defied explanation. In the Canary Islands, sailors were watching ships sail straight into the sky. In Lisbon, church bells rang on their own. In India, animals fell from the sky in terror of the strange darkness. Across the globe, chaos was reigning. Back in Göttingen, Etienne and the German professor were putting the finishing touches on their plan, when a messenger arrived with an urgent letter from Paris. It was from Etienne's brother, Joseph, and it contained news that would change everything. Joseph had been busy running his paper business when he noticed that his employees were struggling to collect rags for their work. You see, rags were an important resource in the 18th century. They were used to make paper, and the quality of the rags determined the quality of the paper. But as word spread of the widespread crop failures in China, paper makers across Europe began to run short of material. That was because the Chinese were eating their paper, turning it into a thick paste and mixing it with their rice to create a cheap substitute for real food. As the letter went on, Joseph explained that the price of rice had soared, and not just in China, but in every port city where it was traded. And everywhere, people were turning to the cheapest available source of carbohydrates to keep themselves alive. All of a sudden, it hit Joseph like a bolt of lightning. The reason why everyone was experiencing such strange weather at the same time was because everyone was going hungry. Could it be possible that the entire world was suffering from a single, massive case of mass hysteria? Was the entire planet having a collective psychotic episode? Joseph raced to tell his brother about his discovery, but when he got to Göttingen, Etienne wasn't interested. He had already solved the mystery, and he was convinced that it had nothing to do with food. Etienne had discovered that all of the unusual weather patterns could be traced back to a single point on the globe. A place so remote and inhospitable that few humans had ever set foot there, the South Pole. And it was here, in this frozen wasteland, that he believed the answer to the world's problems lay hidden. If we can find the South Pole, he told his brother, we can fix everything. All we have to do is dig a hole to the center of the earth. And with that, the two brothers set off on a journey that would take them to the ends of the earth. Because, as it turns out, the world really does have a hole to the center of the earth, and it's located right here in Antarctica. The South Pole isn't a barren wasteland. It's home to a vast ecosystem of plants and animals that rely on the sun for energy. And when the sun goes missing, as it did in 1795, these creatures suffer. So, while it may seem like the South Pole has always been a frozen desert, that's not actually the case. Every 27,000 years, the tilt of the Earth's axis shifts by just a few degrees. And when it does, the South Pole experiences a period of global warming that melts its ice caps and transforms it into a lush, tropical paradise. But this cycle is controlled by a mysterious force known as the Milankovitch cycle, which is driven by changes in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. And when these changes occur, they can trigger a chain reaction that causes the Earth's climate to change dramatically. So while it may seem like a coincidence that so many strange weather events happened in 1795, they were actually all linked together by a single cause, the shifting of the Earth's orbit, and the subsequent melting of the South Pole. This led to a global chain reaction that caused temperatures to soar, crops to fail, and fish to freeze. But as the Earth continued its orbit around the Sun, the South Pole began to refreeze, bringing the world back to normal. And that's why, according to scientists, we haven't experienced anything like this since 1795. Because while it may seem like our climate is changing faster than ever before, it's actually just following the same patterns it's followed for millions of years. We are currently in the middle of a mini ice age that will last until the year 2300. At which point the Earth will warm up again until the year 3000, when we will enter another ice age. This cycle will continue indefinitely, whether we like it or not. But there is hope because the Earth has experienced these dramatic shifts in temperature before, and life has found a way to adapt. So even though the future looks bleak right now, we can be confident that humanity will survive and thrive no matter what the sky throws at us. Chapter 8: The Great Migration. Thousands of people were packing up their lives and leaving New England. It wasn't the first time that Eliza had seen families pulling up stakes and moving west. But it was the largest exodus she had witnessed. People were leaving Massachusetts by the thousands. Some headed south to the Connecticut River Valley in search of work. Others traveled to the Midwest, lured by promises of free land. But most just wanted to escape the grinding poverty that had become of New England since the start of the hot years. Eliza stood at the edge of the common and watched the wagons trundle by, pulled by oxen and horses, driven by men who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Children sat in the back of the wagons with their heads hanging out, waving at the folks they were leaving behind. Mothers holding babies close walked alongside them, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. It had been 3 years since the summer that never was. 3 years since the cold and the snow had come early and stayed late, killing off most of the crops and most of the hope. And now people were leaving, abandoning their homes, abandoning the towns, even abandoning the farms. In the countryside around Concord, fields lay fallow. Livestock herds had been sold off. Whole communities were becoming ghost towns. Since the beginning of the hot years, so much had been lost, so much death, so much suffering. And now, this. Each family that left took a piece of Concord with them, and Concord was becoming a shadow of its former self. Eliza shivered and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She could hear the crunch of gravel underfoot and turned to see Ruth approaching, her expression troubled. "Are you coming home, sister?" she asked, stopping beside Eliza. Eliza hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her gaze drifting back to the departing wagon train. "I wish I knew what to do." "Do what you feel is right," Ruth said softly, reaching out to squeeze Eliza's hand. "Whatever you decide, I won't judge you. Whatever you decide, we will support you." Eliza knew that Ruth wouldn't judge her, but what about everyone else? What would the townspeople think if she left? She had devoted so much of her life to Concord, to this community. She had poured her heart into helping the sick and the dying, tending the graves of the departed. Now the town was dying, and she couldn't bear the thought of leaving it behind. But then again, what good was she doing by staying? She couldn't stop the farms from failing, the families from disintegrating, the town from emptying out. At least if she left, she could try to build something new, maybe find some happiness for herself and her sister. "Why did he write?" Ruth asked, her voice soft. "Did Thomas say why he's writing these letters?" Eliza nodded. "He wants to encourage us to come join him in Ohio. He says there's plenty of room in their cabin for both of us. And he begs us to come because he doesn't want to die in Ohio without any family." A small smile touched Eliza's lips as she recalled the letter she had received from Thomas 2 weeks earlier. They were living in a cabin on the edge of a vast wilderness. Her brother wrote, "If you can imagine a place where the trees are so thick that the sunlight barely makes it to the ground, you have some idea of where we are. There are deer and wild turkeys aplenty. We eat well, the nights are cold, but we keep a fire going most of the time, and we read by its light. We're very happy here," Thomas wrote. And yet he begged his sisters to come and be with him in the wilderness. Eliza reread the letter, tracing the lines with her fingers. Her brother had been only 16 when the hot years began. Too young to marry, too young to think about providing for himself. She had convinced their father to let her take Thomas on the road with her and Ruth. When they left New England, at the time, she had intended to take him north, to Canada. But after crossing the frozen border into New Hampshire, they had decided to go west instead. Eliza had followed her father's dream and settled in Ohio. She remembered the day vividly, the biting wind, the silent walk along the snowy road, Thomas's small hand in hers, his head bent against her skirt. When they reached the cabin, their father had thrown his arms around Thomas and hugged him tight. "You'll be safe here, boy," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "Safe and free. Free." The word echoed in Eliza's mind. Free from the scorching sun, free from the dust storms, free from the crops that refused to grow, free from the constant fear of the next hot year. Was that what Thomas was reaching out to her across the miles, offering her freedom? She looked up to see Ruth staring at her with wide, hopeful eyes. "Will you come?" she whispered. Eliza wanted to say yes. God, how she wanted to say yes. But the thought of leaving everything behind, of starting over in a strange wilderness, filled her with dread. And then a new thought struck her, one that brought a jolt of electricity through her body. Maybe she didn't have to choose between the two. Maybe she could bring the solution to Concord. "What if we don't go to Ohio?" she said slowly. "What if we go to the people who are going to Ohio and tell them we can lead them to better land?" Ruth's eyes widened in understanding. "Like scouts," she breathed. Eliza nodded, excitement building inside her. She knew an area in Ohio where the soil was rich and the rainfall was plentiful. It wasn't as wild and unspoiled as the land her father had chosen, but it was fertile and free from the threat of scorching temperatures. If she could lead these families there, they might actually have a chance at building new lives for themselves. She could help her community and help her family at the same time. She could stay in Concord and find a way to save it. But first, she needed to get to Ohio and figure out how to convince the settlers to follow her. The thought of setting off on such an adventure filled her with trepidation. She had never traveled alone, not in all her 27 years. And besides, what if something happened to her? Who would care for Ruth? But then she met her sister's gaze and saw the hope shining in those depths. And she knew that whatever fears she had, Ruth's hopes were stronger. Eliza walked down the hill from the common and toward the river, the sound of children's laughter echoing in her ears. A group of boys were racing each other along the bank, their shouts carried on the breeze. She smiled, feeling a surge of affection for the town. Even though it was dying, it still held beauty, still held life. As she crossed the bridge, she saw movement in the window of the old brick house on the far side. She stopped and stared, her breath catching in her throat. Could it be? Had someone moved back into the house? Had someone returned to Concord? She took a step closer and saw the face peering out at her more clearly. The woman had dark hair pulled back from her face, her eyes shining with intelligence. As their gazes met, the woman smiled, and Eliza felt a rush of joy. This was the daughter of the family who owned the brick house. Eliza remembered playing with her when they were children, before the hot years had come and taken everything. Before the girl's mother had died, the father had sold the house and left town, and the little girl had gone to live with relatives in Boston. Now she was back, and in her eyes, Eliza saw not only hope, but determination. Perhaps Concord was not beyond saving. Perhaps, with a little ingenuity and a lot of hard work, they could turn things around. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew that she could stay and fight for Concord. Or she could go to Ohio and try to save her family and perhaps the families of others. But she couldn't do both. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. The river sparkled in the fading light, and the crickets began their evening chorus. It was time for her to make a decision. As darkness fell, Eliza sat by the fireplace in her and Ruth's small home, the flickering flames dancing in her wide eyes. She had made her decision. "Where are you going, Eliza?" Ruth asked, her voice filled with concern. Eliza reached out to take her sister's hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "To find our future," she whispered. "We're going to Ohio." Together, the two sisters embraced, their bodies shaking with emotion. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer running away from something. They were running toward something. Something better, something brighter, something worth fighting for. The Year Without a Summer, Chapter 9, The Price of Bread. France, June 1795. With spring planting complete, the harvest should have been at hand. But weeks went by with not a single good day. There were rumors that Queen Marie Antoinette had ordered all grain to be shipped out of the country, leaving nothing for the people of France. Then the king's brother, the Comte d'Artois, was sighted entering Paris. People gathered, outraged by his presence, their anger boiling over when they saw him enter a bakery. People surged forward, banging on the doors and windows. "Open up, we want bread." A woman screamed, her voice hoarse with hunger. "No bread, no peace." A man shouted, throwing stones through the window. It shattered, tinkling like icicles. Glass fell like snow, but no one noticed. They surged forward again. The soldiers guarding the shop fired into the crowd. Women and children fell, bleeding, onto the cobbles. Rage gave way to terror. The protesters dispersed, running down narrow streets, hiding in doorways, stumbling across the Champ de Mars, their empty stomachs growling like wolves. Etienne hurried along, pulling his threadbare greatcoat tighter around him. His legs ached from the long walk back from Versailles, where he'd been forced to abandon the carriage after the soldiers guarding it panicked and ran off. Hunger had brought the city to its knees. Even if he could find somewhere to stay, what would he eat? There was nothing in the house except for the stale bread he'd taken with him and a few apples. He peeled an apple, biting into the tart flesh, but his stomach rumbled louder than ever, and the more he walked, the more angry he became. Wasn't there enough food in France to go around? Was this how the nobility wanted it? No, not while they sat in their palaces eating delicacies from faraway lands. He knew he wasn't alone in his thinking. That's why he'd come to Paris. He found himself walking toward the sound of drums, then banging, the familiar revolutionary chant rising above the din. No more money, no more taxes. Let them eat bread. The crowd surging through the street seemed to part before him as though sensing his anger. His eyes flashing, his jaw set hard. He pushed on, emerging into a large square just as a group of men ran past carrying loaves of bread, ripped open and blackened with fire. One of the men tripped, dropping his torch. The crowd roared as the flames took hold, licking up the side of the building, dancing on the rooftops. Etienne watched, fascinated, as the flames rose higher, spreading to the next building, then the next. The heat of the fire warming him for the first time that day. A hand clamped on his shoulder, and he whirled around to find himself face to face with a grizzled old man. "Are you with us?" the old man demanded, his eyes blazing. "Yes, my friends." The fire reflected in his eyes. "Are you ready to fight, to die?" For France, Etienne hesitated. He'd never been able to defend himself, let alone take someone's life. "I am ready to fight for my country," he said finally, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "Good. Then show me your weapon." Etienne reached for the knife he always carried. A small, thin blade, hardly useful for fighting, but better than nothing. The old man snatched it from him and threw it into the fire. "You must be fearless," he said, grabbing Etienne by the shoulders, looking deep into his eyes. "Fear is the greatest weapon against the people. It is also the greatest motivator. Fear, of course. What did he know about fear? He thought of the gaunt, hungry faces of the people of Paris, the lines of hollow-cheeked beggars, the desperate mothers offering their babies up for adoption so that they wouldn't starve. He thought of Madame de Pompadour, her frightened face peering at him from the carriage window as the mob had surged past, shaking the carriage. Then he remembered his mother, her fearful gaze boring into him as she'd handed him the bag of flour, her lips pressed together tightly. "If anyone asks, we don't have any bread." Now he was being stared at expectantly by the grizzled old man. "Do you have courage?" "Yes." "Do you have determination?" "Yes." "Do you have anything left to lose?" "Yes." "Then you are the perfect revolutionary." The old man clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Come with me." They fought in the streets that night. The old man, surprisingly agile despite his years, but it was pointless. The soldiers, loyal to the king, pushed them back again and again. By midnight, Etienne was bruised and exhausted. He stumbled, falling to his knees in the street. "Get up, you weak worm," the old man snapped, striking him across the face with the flat of his sword. "You have the heart of a coward. Shame on you, shame on you." The words stung like a lash. Was he a coward? Was that why he couldn't bring himself to kill? As he got up, he saw the old man disappear into the shadows. Shamed, he sat down on a nearby stone, leaning against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He wondered where the old man had gone. He hoped he hadn't been unalived. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He looked up to see two guards, their faces hidden behind their masks. "Stand up," they said in unison, gripping his arms and hauling him to his feet. "You are under arrest." He allowed them to lead him away without a word, wondering if this was the end, if he'd be executed for his crimes. But as they pushed him along, he heard the old man's voice ringing in his ears. "Shame on you!" He straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin. Let them kill him. At least then he'd have something to die for. They marched him through the streets, past burning buildings, overturned carriages and shops, stripped bare. Some people stood watching, some cowered, hiding behind their doors. Finally, they reached a large building. "This is the town hall," one of the guards said, pushing him inside. "Here you will be safe." For now, they disappeared into the shadows. Etienne wandered out of the room he'd been shoved into. He walked into a large chamber. It was full of people, men and women, young and old, their faces pale, their clothes in rags. He recognized the grizzled old man. He was standing on a chair, addressing the group. When he saw Etienne, he beckoned with his finger. "Come here, boy." Etienne crossed the room, keeping his eyes fixed on the old man. The old man slid off the chair and joined him. "These people are afraid," he said quietly, gesturing to the huddled figures. "They need a leader. Will you be that leader?" Etienne shook his head. "I am no leader of men. Why do you come to me?" The old man leaned close. "Because, my friend, I believe the end is nigh, and we are being punished by God." "Punished? Why would God punish the French people?" The old man's eyes glittered. "Because we have strayed from the true path, because the earth has rejected the ways of man. The climate itself has risen up against us. Remember the terrible summer of last year. The skies bled fire and drowned the earth in flood. It was a warning. We did not listen. So God has sent us a winter without end. No crops will grow. There will be no harvest. This is our punishment, and I believe this is only the beginning." He saw the wild gleam in the old man's eyes, heard the manic edge to his voice. This man wasn't well, but what did he know? He'd never been much of a scholar, but he'd read enough philosophy to realize the danger of such thinking. If the people believed this man, there'd be no hope of recovery. No matter what the weather did, if the people lost faith in themselves, in their ability to pull through, they were doomed. Etienne stepped forward and laid a hand on the old man's arm. "You're wrong." The old man shook him off impatiently. "Wrong? How can you say that? The evidence is all around us. The rivers are frozen. The fields are barren. You say this is not the end. What then? What is the end?" Etienne looked out at the faces around them, hungry, desperate, but with a spark of hope in their eyes. He needed to convince them that there was a future for France, for the people of Paris, if only they could hold on to their reason just a little longer. He looked back at the old man. "The end," he said, "is when we stop believing there is no hope. The year is 1816, and you're watching the year without a summer." In the last episode, we saw Mary Shelley fall in love with the dashing young poet Lord Byron. Now she is his property, or soon to be. In this episode, we will look at the beginning of the end for the troubled poet. Chapter 10 begins with some backstory. We learn that Lord Byron had spent the previous winter in Venice, where he wrote his long narrative poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. We then pick up with the travellers on their way to Geneva. It is late in the evening, and they are all seated around a small fire outside their rented villa, Diodati. There is little conversation. But what there is makes it clear that Lord Byron is not happy with the lack of intellectual stimulation provided by the others. He says something about modern philosophers and is rebuked by Mr. and Mrs. Kilworth for having so little faith in humanity. Byron retorts that they should not expect him to admire those who are base enough to court his favour. This does not go down well, and the conversation ends with Byron alone. He is left feeling alienated and misunderstood. He is also feeling rather unwell, although it is not clear how or why. But it is clear that this is not just a passing bout of bad health. He is wasting away. It is then that Mary Shelley comes to his rescue. She finds him sitting alone by the dying fire and asks if she may sit with him in silence. Byron tells her that she may and retreats into his own thoughts. Mary sits quietly until he speaks, at which point she falls into step with his conversation. They talk until dawn, or rather Byron talks and Mary listens intently, and he gradually reveals to her the secret history of the man she has fallen in love with. He tells her that he was born with an unusual temperament, one that made him both sensitive and hypersensitive. He goes on to say that because of his looks, he has been treated differently from other children, being constantly admired and fussed over. He says that he was sent to boarding schools, and that he fought like a cat on a hot tin roof, often getting into scrapes and fights that were never his fault. Then his voice drops to a whisper, and he tells her that he killed a man in a duel when he was only 19 years old. His family then decided that England was too small a place for him and dispatched him to Cambridge in Greece, where he lived a life of dissipation. At least, that is what he tells Mary. She understands that there are things he does not want to reveal, but feels closer to him for his trust. As the sun rises, Byron excuses himself to go to bed, leaving Mary feeling satisfied with her night's work. After all, she thinks, she has now made herself indispensable to him. He will surely not send her away after what she did last night. The next morning, Lady Byron joins them in Geneva, and the four travellers set off toward Lake Geneva. As they walk, Mary notices that Lord Byron seems preoccupied and not much company. While walking, Byron begins to recite a poem he has been working on. It is called Darkness and tells the story of the end of the world. The poem is written in the style of a prophecy and tells of a time when the sun will no longer give light to the earth, and the moon will not cool the heat of human suffering. There is no escape from the darkness that blankets the earth. Nature itself shudders at the unimaginable torment of mankind. When the poem is done, Mary is horrified by its subject matter. But she wants to please her lover, so she praises it to the skies. Byron is pleased, but says that it would have been better if he had written the poem in Italian, though he admits that he is too ignorant of that language for such an undertaking. Mary, ever ready with a suggestion, tells him that she knows a remedy for that, and the two retire to a nearby arbor to discuss it. Left alone, Mr. Polidori pulls out a notebook and begins to write furiously. He is going to call his story The Vampire, and it will be about a mysterious lord who returns home from Eastern Europe and preys upon his sister's blood. That is, after all, what the rumors say he does. Polidori is enjoying the gloom of the day. There is something very heady about the thought of vampires. Back in the arbor, Byron and Mary are still discussing poetry. Mary believes that Byron could make a fortune if he would write a sensational poem about the macabre, something that would shock and delight the English reading public. Byron agrees that such a poem might make him rich, but says that his muse will not suffer such prostitution. However, he cannot resist the chance to needle his tormentor and tells her that she need not fear that he will sink so low. He says that he would sooner cut off his own balls than publish a poem for money. Mary is shocked at such a flippant remark. Just think, she says, you might beget no heirs, and your title would die with you. Byron is mollified, and tells her that he would give up more than his balls for a good poem. Mary knows she has won the argument, and takes great pleasure in knowing that she can dominate him with her mind. Meanwhile, Polidori is making good progress with his vampire story. In a letter to a friend, he writes, "My dear sir, I have something new to show you when I return to England. A story, a poem, a sort of vampire. What do you think? Does it not sound wild? I have been writing like a demon, and I'm almost done." That evening, the group is gathered together, listening to Lord Byron play the guitar. After he finishes a song, Mary congratulates him and tells him that she is sure his music will become famous. She then suggests that he write a story to go along with the song, and Byron laughs it off. Meanwhile, Polidori continues to write his story. He is now on his third page and has begun to include elements from John Polidori's real-life experiences in Greece. The story is darker than Mary Shelley's fantasies allow. For instance, his protagonist is able to pass for human during the day by drinking the blood of animals. Also, the victim's blood mingles with his own, and thus he is forever tainted and accursed. As the night wears on, Mary grows tired of her lover's sullen mood and goes to bed. When she wakes, she finds that he is gone. She feels rather uneasy, not knowing what he is up to, and decides to pay a visit to the kitchen to see if she can find out. The cook tells her that Lord Byron is downstairs with the others playing cards. As Mary creeps closer, she hears raised voices coming from the room. Byron is angry and accuses Mr. Kilworth of cheating. She stands in the doorway trying to make sense of the quarrel, but the sound of laughter suddenly cuts off Byron's tirade and Mary retreats back to her room. Later that day, she is called downstairs to find Byron in a dreadful state. He is raging and talking in a foreign language. She tries to calm him down, but he pushes her away. She leaves the room in tears and spends the rest of the day in her room alone. She is now starting to feel that there is something very wrong with the man she loves, and wonders if she might be in danger. Back downstairs, Byron is continuing his tantrum, and the others are doing their best to ignore him. Suddenly, he stops his tirade and turns his attention to Polidori, who is hiding in the corner. Byron grabs Polidori by the collar and asks him why he has come to his villa. Then he threatens to ruin his career and kill his reputation. Mrs. Shelley tells Byron that this is not right and that they must leave him alone. Byron throws back his head and laughs loudly. Then he stops and says to Mary, "You see how mad I am? Must I really go?" Mary knows that her lover is in no fit state to travel and tries to persuade him to stay another day. But he has made up his mind and insists on leaving at once. During the journey, Byron continues to be foul-tempered and spends most of his time in bed. Mary stays by his side and nurses him back to health, while the others get on with the business of reaching Switzerland. We end the chapter with a letter from John William Polidori to a friend. He writes, "How well I remember the first time I read The Vampire to my dear Byron. Write it, he cried. I shall make it a rule never to read anything to him again without his asking for it." And so we see that Mary Shelley's fantastical visions of her lover are finally crumbling away. She is in love with a monster, and she doesn't even know it yet. Now check out Lord Byron's complete poem, Darkness. Or check out the vampire story that inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. Chapter 11 of The Year Without a Summer. Late 1816, the skies begin to clear. Though the sun still seems sullen and cold, it is easier now to see its face. The ash that has hung in the air since April, carried by winds across the globe, begins to settle. And in its wake, the world is left breathless, choking on fine grey dust. But out of this gritty residue, something new is born. In the fields around the stricken villages, small green shoots push through the deadened soil. They are not the potato plants that have traditionally sprung up here, nor are they the lush grain crops that farmers had hoped for. Instead, wild mustard, sunflowers, and other weeds that can withstand frost take root. Etienne, his health much improved from his harrowing experience, leaves the clinic and returns to his farm. He is a changed man, haunted by what he has seen and heard. On his way home, he stops at the local printing press and publishes his findings from the past 18 months. It's a slim volume, but an important one. He calls it a season without summer. He describes the bizarre weather, the strange illnesses, and the heartbreaking loss of life. Most importantly, he writes of the need for change, for a rethinking of society's structures and relationship with nature. His book is an immediate success. Soon it is being translated into several languages. But while he basks in the glow of his literary debut, thinking he has done his part to help stave off future disasters, in reality, no one is listening. No one wants to hear what he has to say. They want to forget the past year ever happened. For them, it's easier to pretend that the cold and hunger were just a bad dream, that their crops will grow properly next year, and that the famine and fever will not return. The following spring, the earth thaws and farmers plant their seeds. Across Europe and America, they hope for a good harvest. But the crops struggle in the cold, wet ground. The summer is cool again, but not as bitterly cold as the last. By September, the grain is in, and the outlook for the winter is not so dire. Relief, though tinged with sadness, is widespread. People stagger through another winter without proper food or warmth. But because there is more fuel available, fewer die of cold exposure. The fever also spares many, and people begin to believe that the worst is over. Aoife's father cannot bear to spend another winter in this god-forsaken place. He has always dreamed of a better life for himself and his family, and now he will finally make it a reality. He takes out a loan against the value of the little farm they own and buys passage for his family to Canada. Their wild lands still stretch unbroken to the horizon and promise a fresh start. Her mother and siblings leave Ireland full of hope, but Aoife refuses to go. She loves her people and her land too much to turn her back on them. Besides, she knows her skills would be better used here. She could be of more help staying behind than if she fled to some far-off distant land. So, while her family sails away from the only home they have ever known, she stays behind, finding comfort in the familiar routine of her work at the clinic. She tends the sick and dying, caring for them with the same dedication as before, and when they die, she buries them with the same reverence, whispering prayers and placing small stones on their graves. Eliza, meanwhile, has found her mission. Now that the fever is passing, she sees that the real sickness in this land is a deep-rooted poverty. Since the beginning of the Troubles, most of the healthy young men have died, either working the farms or fishing for food. Those who remain are too ill or too old to do much work, and the women and children are afraid to venture outside for fear of exposure or worse. So Eliza organizes classes for the children of the village, teaching them how to sow hardy crops that can thrive in the poor soil and cold climate. She shows them how to identify edible plants and herbs, and how to nurse a sick animal back to health. She even helps the older people find ways to make money from their small plots of land. Within a few years, the village begins to look less like a graveyard and more like a community. One evening, as the villagers gather for their weekly storytelling session, Eliza asks them why they don't plant the crops that she has shown them. She has spent months teaching these people how to grow food, yet they still prefer to plant potatoes. Surely they must know by now that those crops will fail them. We do not wish to depend on the uncertain bounty of the soil, says an old woman, her face lined with grief and suspicion. Our fate is in the hands of the Almighty. He will provide for us if we trust in Him. And what of your children? Eliza asks gently. Do you wish them to suffer? The woman falls silent. She looks down at the rough-spun dress on her thin, bony arms and sighs. We have planted your crops before, child, but the rains came and washed them away. Our soil is cursed. We cannot grow anything decent here. Eliza feels a surge of anger. These people have been given up on by everyone, including herself. Until now, she has been too afraid to get close to them. She feared becoming attached and having to watch them die. But she realizes that if she wants to help them, she must cast aside her fears. Then let me show you how to build terraces and ditches to hold back the water. She says, I will show you how to make gables and walls to protect your crops from the wind and rain. The old woman nods slowly. You are right, child. We cannot go on like this. We must try to grow food, or we will all starve. As the others disperse to their homes, Eliza and the old woman stay behind to discuss the changes that lie ahead. What will you call yourself when you have taught us all of this? The old woman asks. Whatever you wish, replies Eliza. I am but a humble servant of the people. Years pass and the crops grow. At first, it is hard. Some crops fail and people do indeed starve. Others become ill and die. But slowly the land begins to yield its bounty and the people prosper. Eliza becomes known as the healer, for she has healed not only bodies but minds as well. She teaches the people to accept help and to ask for it when they need it. She shows them that they are not weak for needing assistance, but strong for knowing when to reach out for it. One day, as she walks through the village, she hears the sound of music. It is a lively jig, played on a fiddle and a burin. She follows the sound and comes upon a group of children dancing in the street. Their laughter and high spirits warm her heart. She has brought these children up since they were toddlers, teaching them about the world and showing them how to survive in it. Now they are grown up and happy, and she could not be more pleased. Suddenly, she feels a tap on her shoulder. She turns to see a young man with a kind face and gentle eyes. Do you remember me, miss? He asks. Of course I do. You were one of the first children I taught. She smiles. It's good to see you again, Liam. And you, ma'am, says Liam. I wanted to tell you that you have made a great difference in this place. You came when no one else could help us. You stayed when everyone else had given up on us. You believed in us when we had lost faith in ourselves. Eliza blushes. It was nothing, really. I was just doing what needed to be done. No, says Liam. You were more than that. You are more than that. You are a true daughter of Ireland, and we are honored to have you among us. He takes her hand and raises it, and the other children join in until the entire group is holding her hand and shouting, Long live the healer! Long live our Eliza! Tears spring to her eyes. This is where she belongs. She realizes she may have been born in England, but Ireland has become her home. And these people, with their indomitable spirit and fierce loyalty, have become her family. She feels a tap on her shoulder again and turns to see a tall, handsome stranger. He has fiery red hair and green eyes that sparkle with amusement. May I have this dance, Miss Eliza? He asks, bowing slightly. Startled, she can only nod her assent, and he leads her into the circle. As they dance, he whispers in her ear, You have a lovely name, Eliza. It suits you well. She smiles, her heart lighter than it has been in years. She does not know this man, but she likes him immediately. And as the music swells, she feels a sudden surge of confidence. She throws her head back and laughs, feeling the joy of life course through her veins. She is alive and well and loved. What more could she ask for? As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Eliza and her companion leave the village to walk among the newly planted crops. Hand in hand, they talk in low voices, sharing hopes and dreams for the future. The sky is filled with stars, and the air is sweet with the scent of wildflowers. In the distance, the faint strains of music drift across the fields, a reminder of the celebration that awaits them back in the village. The year without a summer may be over, but for Eliza and the people of Ireland, a new season has just begun. When I first started writing The Year Without a Summer, I thought I had an interesting premise, but I was not prepared for just how fascinating the science is. It's amazing how much we have learned about this incredible eruption. And if you think you know everything, then challenge yourself and find out more by testing your knowledge with my quiz at the end of this episode. Chapter 12. Echoes in the Earth. The year is 1816, and everywhere the world is waking up to spring, or at least it should be. For 2 years, people have been living under a strange sky, a sky without summer. But finally, the clouds are clearing, and hope is returning. Europe and North America may yet have a warm season, even if only in the last few months of the year. The starving crops need every bit of sun they can get. People everywhere are tired of eating their meager stores of dried meat and fish and roots. They are tired of the cold, the hunger, and the death that has come with this endless winter. Are they finally going to be able to start over? In his observatory in Ingelheim, Germany, astronomer Carl Ludwig Harding watches the skies with relief. The clouds that have obscured the face of the moon are gone. It looks as beautiful and bright as ever. It feels good to see something familiar after so much time spent in an unrecognizable world. He notes the phases of the moon and planets, carefully charting the movements of the cosmos. Even though the sun shines warmly on his face, he shivers as he pulls his coat tighter around him. When he turns back to his instruments, he sees a faint glow coming from the room next door. His friend and fellow astronomer, Franz von Grothwesen, is working late again. Harding wonders what his friend could possibly be doing. Von Grotius's research is normally so precise and predictable, like the stars themselves. Meanwhile, inside the other room, von Grothwesen paces frantically. He runs his fingers through his already wild hair. His eyes are wide and shining. He stops pacing when he hears the knock and opens the door before his colleague has even knocked twice. "Harding, you must come see this," he says, pulling his friend into the room. On a table lies a piece of rock, a piece of pumice. And as Harding examines it, he recognizes tiny crystals of feldspar that he has seen before. Just once before, during his brief stay in Indonesia. Could it be possible? Could this rock really have come from there? Geologist John Johnston sits hunched over a rock in his London lab. Around him are scattered books and papers, some with diagrams and equations drawn in the margins. Outside, spring is arriving, but here in this basement, the only sign of the passing seasons is the candle on his desk, slowly burning away. Johnston runs a hand over the rough surface of the rock. This is not a volcanic rock. He knows that much, and he has been searching for an explanation for this mystery rock for weeks now. What is it doing here in London? Where did it come from? His answer may be buried deep in the earth, in the belly of a volcano. And so the brilliant but reclusive geologist takes a shovel and heads out. Across the channel, past the white cliffs of Dover, and into the dark heart of England, he descends into the crater of a volcano. Smoke curls around his head as he digs deeper and deeper. All around him are the familiar layers of ash and cinders. And then, suddenly, a new layer, A layer not of fire, but of ice, a layer that does not belong here. It is full of clay and lime and fossils of sea creatures that died when the volcano erupted. Creatures that should have been vaporized by the heat, but were instead suffocated by cold. How can this be? What happened here? As Johnston struggles to uncover the answers, the world outside is beginning to wake up. Slowly, the world begins to remember what spring is like. Farmers plant seeds that will one day bring forth the harvest. In the northern hemisphere, the snow melts and reveals a landscape that has been shaped by winter. Animals emerge from their burrows and nests, and life begins to stir all around. Leaves unfurl on trees, and birdsong fills the air. For the first time in years, there is a sense of optimism. It might still be a long time before life returns to normal, but at least the worst seems to be over. But for many, the worst is just beginning. For 2 years, they have been surviving on their stores of food that has been steadily dwindling. Now, as spring comes, they must try to rebuild. Families who lost their sons, daughters, fathers and mothers to the cold and the hunger struggle to plant the fields. Many cannot find the strength to carry on. Farmers in the United States are surveying the damage done to their crops and livestock. Yields are down across the board, with whole fields of grain destroyed by frost and snow. Meadows that should have been full of grass are covered in ice, forcing farmers to sell their cattle early or watch them starve. In Illinois, George Davenport shoots a deer that is caught in a trap laid out for wolves. He needs the meat for his family. Across the Atlantic, a ship sails into port carrying immigrants who fled the famine in Ireland. Some are lucky enough to find work, others head straight to the nearest soup kitchen. In Batavia, a Dutch port city in Indonesia, a local geologist named Samuel admitted that he named Tambora after the local term for shooting, because the mountain seemed to shoot up from the ocean, and while he was right, it wasn't shooting up, it was exploding outwards, creating the largest eruption in recorded history. As the world begins to stir from its long winter's nap, scientists around the world are finally beginning to understand what caused this strange phenomenon. In Paris, Joseph Louis Lagrange is struck by the coincidence of the comet's visit and the strange cold weather that followed. He knows there is a connection between the two, but he doesn't know what it is. In Göttingen, Germany, mineralogist Johann Friedrich Henkel von Donnersmarck examines samples of dust from the air and finds that it contains a large amount of sulfuric acid. He realizes that this is the same composition as the acid rain that fell in 1814 and 1815. But where is it coming from? On the island of Java, a local geologist named Samuel admitted that he named Tambora after the local term for shooting, because the mountain seemed to shoot up from the ocean. He was right, but not for the reason he thought. The mountain wasn't shooting up, it was exploding outward, creating the largest eruption in recorded history. Now, 5 months later, he is exploring the crater. He has heard rumors that a huge hole has opened up on the side of the mountain, and he wants to see for himself. As he climbs higher and higher, he can feel the heat coming from the mountain, even though the summit is covered in ice and snow. Could there be something left inside? Something powerful enough to affect the entire world? He reaches the rim of the crater and gazes down into the abyss. He knows he is looking at the source of the strange cold that has gripped the world. He sees a thin layer of water covering a vast lake of molten rock. There is no bottom to this lake. It stretches down into the earth, down into the very core of the planet. And as he watches, he sees something else, something moving inside the magma. It is rising, growing larger. There is something inside the earth, something stirring. Tambora's crater is vast, almost 3 miles across and nearly 700 feet deep. As he stands at the edge, Samuel realizes that he is looking at the source of the strange cold that has gripped the world for the past 2 years. He knows that he is witnessing something truly special, something that will change the world forever. As he descends into the crater, he carries with him the weight of the world's hopes and dreams. He knows that he is about to discover something that will either save us or destroy us. In 1815, Tambora erupted with such force that it created a 3-mile wide and 700-foot deep crater in the island of Sumba, Indonesia. This eruption ejected 36 cubic miles of ash and rock into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun and causing temperatures to plummet. But Tambora's influence reached far beyond the immediate vicinity. Its effects were felt around the globe. Crops failed, famine ensued, and people everywhere struggled to survive. Now, 6 months later, the world is beginning to recover, but the scars of the eruption remain. Ash and pumice have been found as far away as Western Australia and the Caribbean islands, and the effects of the eruption are still being felt. But as scientists learn more about what happened on that fateful day in 1815, they are also learning how to prevent such a disaster from happening again. So how well do you know the story of the year without a summer? Test your knowledge with my quiz. Choose the best answer for each question. Question 1. What caused the ice in Johnston's volcano? A. The eruption of Mount Tambora. The impact of a comet. An asteroid. Question 2. Where did the immigrants who landed in the United States come from? A. Shanab, Atlantic, England. Question 3. What did von Grothwesen find in his observatory? A comet. Pumice from Mount Tambora. An asteroid. Question 4. Who was Samuel? A Dutch geologist who discovered the crater of Mount Tambora. An American astronomer who mapped the path of the comets. An English farmer who kept a diary of the events of 1816. Answer 1. A, 2, B, 3, B, 4. A. How did you do? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about the year without a summer, check out my playlist on the channel. I'll see you next time. I do not know what it is about this season of the year that makes people nostalgic. It's definitely not the weather. The incessant rain and cold never lend themselves to reflection and remembrance. But something about the shortening days seems to send people back to where they were at the start of this summer. I too have been thinking of last year, though it doesn't seem possible that it has already been 1 year since the world changed. And like so many others, I have found myself wondering if things will ever go back to how they were. To be honest, I don't think they will, or at least not for a very long time. I am walking today because my horse is still lame and refuses to carry me. I doubt he'll ever get over the injury he sustained when our carriage overturned on the way from York to Newcastle. We couldn't stay in York after what happened there. You know, we could hardly show our faces in town again after we caused such a commotion, especially when news got out about the baby and all those poor souls lost at sea. My own father refused to speak to me for weeks. He said it was all my fault. I suppose he thought I did it on purpose. It hasn't been easy being on the road with a 2-year-old, but she's taken it all in her stride. I wish I could say the same about William. He's become more withdrawn and taciturn than ever, though I don't know whether to blame the loss of his ship or the loss of his fortune. When we had money, he was generous and carefree. But now we're scraping by. He's become a different person. At times, I almost don't recognize him, and that scares me more than anything else does. We arrived here a week ago, and have stayed at this inn while William looks for work. I'm sure he'll find something soon. He's the best ship's captain in the world, even if I do say so myself. But in the meantime, I'm running out of money. I dread to think how we would fare if I lost my beauty. What would William do then? What would anyone do with a blind, lame, and heavily pregnant woman who's also an embarrassment to society? I shiver at the thought, pulling my shawl tighter around me. We left England last fall, abandoning our home, our friends, and everything familiar to us. Now we're moving north, seeking a new life in a strange land. Some days I think it would have been better if we'd gone abroad instead, like my sister and her husband. They're in Italy right now, touring the great cities and living the high life, all thanks to my father's money. But I know they would never have risked going to America. So it was my decision to come here. I didn't want to stay in England and be reminded of what I'd lost. I wanted to start over somewhere new, and yet here I am, feeling sorry for myself. How can I feel sorry for myself when so many others have suffered so much more than I have? When people have lost their entire families, their homes, and sometimes their reason. I have nothing to complain about. No, I won't allow myself to do that. I won't allow myself to forget what happened here last year. I won't forget those poor souls who suffered and died aboard the Rebecca. I won't forget my lost baby or all the children who never got to see their second summer. I won't forget the hundreds of widows who now walk the streets of this city, nor the thousands of empty beds in homes across the countryside. I will remember them all because I owe it to them. I owe it to them to make something good come out of this. For some, that means studying the skies, looking for answers in the stars, and recording the sun's behavior in hopes that it might warn us of future disasters. For others, it means packing up and leaving. This region was once a thriving center of trade and industry, but now people are going elsewhere. People are afraid, and I don't blame them. Who wouldn't be afraid after what happened last year? I myself would rather live under the shadow of a volcano than through another winter like the one we just had. Some have turned to writing. Mrs. Radcliffe has published a poem about the children lost at sea. I saw a copy of it in a shop window the other day and stopped to read it. I could see it was selling well, too, because most of them had been bought. It's a sad, haunting piece, but one that touches the heart. She writes beautifully, and it was nice to read something by her again. The last thing I read before the newspapers banned her from publication was her story of the mysterious castle. I reread it on the journey here because I thought it might cheer me up. Did it cheer me up? No, of course it didn't. I've read it at least a dozen times, and each time it makes me cry. But why do I keep reading it if it upsets me so much? I suppose it's because Mrs. Radcliffe can write like an angel. Or perhaps it's because she understood me better than anyone else. Or maybe it's just habit. We always did read her books when we were younger, didn't we, Elizabeth? Yes, we did. We were devoted to those stories. There's a knock at the door. I hope it's Mrs. Danvers. I told her we'd be leaving in a few days, but I haven't heard from her since. If only I could take her with me. I need someone to help me look after William. I wonder how she's managing on her own. Does Mr. Rochester still visit her? I know he's back at Thornfield. People say he rebuilt the house and took in boarders, but I've never seen him. I dare not ask. Each time I see him, I fear he'll discover who I really am. I fear he'll realize I'm not the person I pretend to be, that I'm a fraud. Will he expose me? Oh, don't be silly. Of course he won't. He knows you're not a fraud. Eliza, you're as real as any of us. You know, I never believed in ghosts until last year. I saw them all around me, all the ghosts of the past. Summer walking along the shore, I would see the ghosts of children playing and hear the sound of their laughter. Then, when I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't their laughter after all, but the cries of gulls. Are you all right, Miss Eliza? Are you sure you shouldn't be resting? Don't worry about me, Mrs. Danvers. I'm fine. Why should I rest? I'm not the one who's heavily pregnant. I wish you would let me come with you. I'd look after your baby, and William could earn money as a sailor again. Would that be all right, William? Yes, it would be all right. And I'd love to have Mrs. Danvers with me, but I know she can't leave her post. Mr. Rochester needs someone to look after him. He's all alone in that big house. Just as well, he's got plenty of money. So when are you leaving? Tomorrow? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. It's just that I thought you might stay a while longer. Oh no, I can't. William needs to find work, and I need to find lodgings. There are people in this town who remember who I am. Soon enough, word gets around, and we don't want that happening again. Thank you for coming to see me, Mrs. Danvers. I'm glad you came. Please, don't cry. You'll upset your baby. Yes, I suppose it's time I was going. Goodbye, Mrs. Danvers. Thank you again. Goodbye. As the carriage rattled along the muddy road, I felt tears prickling at my eyes. Mrs. Danvers has been with me for over 12 years. I don't know what I would have done without her all those years ago. She saved my life. She helped me escape Lowood when I could bear it no longer. She took care of me when I was sick and brought me back from the brink of death. And now I'm leaving her behind, alone in that creepy house with Mr. Rochester. I wish I could go back and tell her that she needn't worry about Mr. Rochester. That he's not a ghost, that he's very much alive. I wish I could tell her that I'm not really Jane Eyre either, but Eliza, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Reed of Gateshead. I wish I could tell her all my secrets, but I can't. I have to pretend to be someone I'm not, someone who lived a different life from mine. I have to pretend for William's sake, for my unborn child's sake. I have to pretend that I'm happy. Here we are, love. Our new home. It's not much, but it's ours. I like it. It's small, but it's neat and tidy. We can afford to stay here. You're sure you don't want me to go and look for work in the city, love? I'll find something. Don't you worry. You rest. You and the baby come first. Yes, I know you would do that. Thank you. Now let's go inside. Spring is coming. I can feel it. Soon the fields will be green and the snowdrops will be out. And when the first buds appear, I'm going to plant some seeds. I hope we have a good harvest this year. We need it more than ever. Yes, we do, love. Come on, then, let's go inside and make ourselves at home.